All right, so I have a very short introduction that was given to me by these two. They said they're going to introduce themselves more once they take over. So I have Nancy Hadlock and Richard Potashin, right? Oh, I practiced so much on that. Have been recording and preserving the spirits of sheepherders in Nevada and California since 2002, just the other day. Through their research, they have discovered the experiences of these characters hardened by life on the open range. And then it goes on to say, Nancy and Richard will enlighten attendees to the day-to-day lives of these men who were omitted from the settlement history of the American West. Please welcome Nancy and Richard.
Good evening. We usually start out by just making sure that you have an idea of what we're talking about. So this is the Voices from the Ghostly White Aspens. So what we're going to tell you about is the history, a little bit of the history of sheep herding throughout the eastern California and eastern Nevada. And some of these beautiful carvings tell us things that you wouldn't imagine. But first we have to tell you a little bit about ourselves.
Right. Nancy Hadlock here is the genuine article. She's a half Basque. And when I met her in 2002, I found out that she was no stranger to the world of arborglyphs. In fact, she'd been visiting these carvings on many camping trips that her family took throughout the mountains of Nevada. And her mom, also being a Basque, was able to translate some of those, the ones that were in Spanish at least. And she went on to pursue her education at UNR, as well as Sacramento State, and pursued a career for 40 years as a National Park Service interpretive ranger. And so here she is.
And this is Richard Potashin, and Richard started out looking at petroglyphs. That was his original interest. And Richard is also a calligrapher. Many of the drawings and designs that both we're wearing, you'll see in the exhibit, Richard has actually done. So when he started looking at the carvings, they fascinated him. The idea that you could take that blank white palette of an aspen tree and make it look like something and have beautiful writing. So he got interested that way. And he decided at one point that he wanted to offer that interest, as well as his interest just in aspen trees, to the public. So he decided to create a seminar for the Mona Lake Committee. And at the time we were working in the same building, he was also working for Manson, our National Historic Site. And so we were talking, and I saw that, and I looked at him, and I thought, Potashin? He's going to do a thing about arborglyphs and Basque? What does he know about Basque? So I could not afford his seminar at the time, being a poor park ranger. So I kind of sidled up to him and said, hey, can you let me in your seminar? I'll be your color person. I'll talk a little more about the Basques, and I'll even offer to cook some Americanized Basque food for the people if you're interested. He claims I batted my eyes, but
Yeah, you want to do that?
So, as we always tell people, kind of the rest is history. We did the first seminar together, and we've been working on arborglyphs together, and we even gotten married in an aspen grove. So we are quite truly obsessed.
Right. And the trees did bring us together. And keep us together.
And keep us together, yeah.
So, like Nancy said, we've been documenting carvings. Who's that? Oh, yeah, we've been documenting carvings for over 20 years, predominantly throughout the Great Basin on both edges, the eastern Nevada area, as well as the eastern Sierra area for the BLM and the Forest Service.
So we want to thank very much, start out with Churchill County Museum. We've kind of wanted to have our exhibit here for quite some time, well over 5 or 6 years, and are really happy to finally get the exhibit in here. And hopefully you'll get a chance to spend a little more time looking at the exhibit as well. we're also just really happy to be here tonight. We really appreciate everybody who's helped us. And you guys have a really great group of people in this museum. I hope you appreciate them.
We'd also like to extend thanks to Jose Malea, as a professor of Basque Studies at UNR, who wrote this incredible book called Speaking Through the Aspens. We refer to it as our Bible. Jose traveled throughout Nevada videoing arborglyphs in the 70s and 80s, and it brought it to the attention of archaeologists and other resource professionals to say, hey, this is serious stuff here. It's not just doodles and pornography. It is the story of an immigrant group and their history in the Great Basin throughout the American West, so we thank him.
And we also want to thank a couple of private associations, the Eastern Sierra Interpretive Association, as well as the Great Basin Heritage Area, both of which have funded projects for us to keep us documenting, keep us out there, get people interested. But the one we really think is Great Basin Heritage Area. They're the ones who funded the exhibit. So we definitely have to thank them.
And a thank you to the public land agencies, the Forest Service and the BLM, who have provided a logistical support, maps, historic background for a number of our projects as well.
And we're here tonight to kind of talk a little bit about the underrepresented groups that were out there herding sheep for years and years. And as Richard and I love to tell people, John Wayne never played a sheep herder. However, Glenn Ford did. We were able to find at least one film that portrays sheep herders as something other than less than. And Glenn Ford did that in a very good fashion. He played the hero in the end. He won the fair maiden.
Right, he got the girl. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the history of sheep herding, how it became an important industry throughout the Great Basin, especially in the state of Nevada.
And we start kind of the history in Nevada pretty early on. One of the first ranches was a Spanish ranch way over on the east side, kind of between Yelko and Ely. And the Spanish ranch was a sheep herding ranch. The Altuve brothers, who came from California, one of the brothers was very tall, so his nickname was Palo Alto. And he was the one who kind of encouraged everybody to come to his sheep ranch. It became a very, very outstanding ranch in the area. And a lot of other people came following them, realizing that there was a lot of open land here that sheep could graze on.
And mining camps throughout the Eastern Sierra, like Bodie and Lundy and other boom camps, provided a ready market for sheep products, lamb and mutton to fill the tummies of the miners, and wool products to provide their warmth in the cold winter months. Right. In the Eastern Sierra, literally hundreds of thousands of sheep are grazed every year from a variety of different directions. There was a sheep driveway that led from Bakersfield all the way up the west side of the Owens Valley, on up into the Bodie Hills, the White Mountains, Monitor Pass. Sheep also came from Central Valley and other portions of western Nevada. So this was the heyday of sheep raising from roughly the late 1800s on into the 1970s.
And most of the sheep, you could see sheep everywhere. I mean, there were sheep in the hills, there were sheep in the valleys, there were sheep in the towns, there were sheep on ranches, there were sheep in downtown. So there were sheep everywhere. Every time a boom town popped up somewhere, the people who ran the sheep companies pretty much figured they could actually mine the pockets of the miner by providing them with food and clothing. So they were all over the place. But the difficulty became not so much getting the sheep, but trying to find people who would herd the sheep. It's a lonely life. You're out there for days on end, and these years you were out there for months on end with no one else to talk to and no one else around. So they had to find something to do while they were out there. Here they were stricken with boredom. So what are you going to do?
Well, you might try catching trout, or you might cook up beans for dinner, or you might carve a tree. And one carving that I recall particularly was what type of people would be wanting to do this. It was a job that really nobody wanted, but it was long live the sheepherders and those who have the guts to stay out here. So let's learn a little bit about these folks.
So one of the groups that had a lot of guts and a lot of courage and a lot of, patience, I guess, were the Basque. And eventually they were kind of to become the ones who took over the sheep herding industry as far as being the best herders. Although if you read and you talk to people, you find out that a lot of the time that the Irish and the Scottish and the English actually were better herders. They just didn't stick it out. They left. It was the Basque who would be willing to be out there for months and months on end. So these mysterious people between Spain and France and the Pyrenees became the ones who took over the sheep industries during that time period, became the famous herders. And not so much because they were great at it, but just because they were stubborn and they wouldn't leave the sheep. So they stuck it out. They were a lot of Basque in the state of Nevada and on the Eastern Sierra who actually not only herded sheep, but eventually went into the sheep business. But for the majority of them, what they did is it was the jumping off point. Almost every Basque who came to the United States during that time period, about 90% of them at some point were sheep herders. But then they became other things. They went into gardening. They owned hotels and restaurants. They started getting into other businesses that would make money for them. But almost every single one, you talk to them, you'll find they started out as a sheep herder. So they carved, but what did they carve with?
Well, those ghostly white aspens provided quite an interesting canvas. You could almost just look at an aspen and it'll create a scar. The sheepherders predominantly used a variety of tools. The most prominent was the pocket knife that they were usually issued when they were outfitted before they went out on the open range. We ran into a gentleman who said he grew his fingernails out long enough that he could put a scar on the tree, put his name on it. 10-penny nails, anything that had a sharp edge to it. And then, sometimes these folks would be in areas where there was a volcanic substrate, pick up a piece of obsidian, that's one of the sharpest substances known to us, and use that to carve a tree. It all depended on what you had available at the time.
So what did they carve? Well, I guess, like most of us, we like to leave our names, a lot of times the dates. Everybody likes to sign into a register, let everybody know you've been there. We also like to brag about where we're from. Euskadi is the word for the Basque land, the Basque speakers. So they also like to leave memories, maybe the lady who's waiting for them at home in one sense or another. Or possibly just a message, something like, no deer here. Maybe a disappointed hunter. So they also carved, we call it the famous, the infamous, and maybe just a close relative. Or maybe not so close. This is Antonio Urrutia, and Urrutia is a really common Basque name. It's kind of like Johnson or Smith. Very, very common name. So we were doing a lot of carvings. We were carving up in the Bodie area, and we ran onto Antonio Urrutia in the early teens. And beautiful. Oh, he could carve really nicely. We were very, very impressed with his carvings. And didn't think too much of it. My family, there's an Urrutia, so I just kind of thought, one of the many Urrutias. Until actually it was my birthday, and I had a book on Carson Valley. And I was looking through the book on Carson Valley, and it talked about this Antonio Urrutia and where he came from. And I kind of started reading about him and his family. He came to the United States. He did sheep herding, and he went back home and he got married. And he married, I guess she would be my great aunt. So it was like, I looked at that and I went, oh, this isn't just any Urrutia, this is my Urrutia. My Urrutia. So it was definitely not something we were doing on purpose, but I was quite pleased to find that at least in one grove somewhere out there where we were documenting trees, I found a distant relative, which was really cool.
She never lets me forget it. Oh no, not another Urrutia. Another interesting name that maybe some of you are familiar with is Borda. Three brothers who came from Birare in the French Basque country and established themselves as sheep herders first and then sheep ranchers in the Gardnerville area. They carved numerous trees up in Monitor Pass. This carving that you see on the screen right now is 1915. Ramon, again, like Nancy said, this was a stepping stone for more lucrative careers, sheepherding was. Ramon ended up owning a motel, the East Fork Motel in Gardnerville, in that little Basque area of Gardnerville, and went on to run a restaurant as well. And one of his, I think it's his great-grandson, anybody familiar with the name Teddy Borda? Okay. Teddy Borda is one of the, he's out of Dayton, Nevada. And he's one of the few Basque sheepmen who still runs open range sheep outfits. In other words, trails his sheep for hundreds of miles. He trails his sheep out to Twin Lakes and other areas. He also grazes off the vegetation around west of Carson City for the Forest Service to eliminate some of the fire danger as well. So. And then another very famous Nevada family is depicted on carving.
And so you can read that, but it's maybe by the X, Laxalt. Yeah, it's the Laxalts. Yeah, definitely one of the names that brought Basque kind of to the forefront in the United States is being recognized as Basque. Paul Laxalt was a politician, very, very good friends with Ronald Reagan at the time, very good politician here in Nevada, very well known. And his brother Robert, who is an extremely famous writer and very, very well known to the University of Nevada for his writings, brought it again to the public, the whole idea of sheepherding through Sweet Promised Land, one of his first books that he published. Very well done. This particular carving, however, is neither of theirs. This is the brother to their father. This is Pierre Laxalt, and Pierre stayed in sheepherding. Actually, so did Paul and Robert's father. They stayed in sheepherding as well. And this gentleman, though, kind of moved over to northern Nevada, not in that area. So this is Pierre. This carving was very well done, very nice, and probably is not existing any longer. So if you go up to Monitor Pass, this is probably not one you will find. So these white palettes, these ghostly whites, sometimes give us names that we also don't know. Things that we have to research, things that we have to find out about. And so that's part of what we do. We don't just document, we actually go back and do the writing and try and find out something about some of them. We still don't know very much about Dionisio Martino. He was a herder, and that right now is probably the most we know.
Another interesting character that we encountered in the groves was a gentleman by the name of Alex Iastorza, and he had a very interesting style. He carved sideways on the tree, and we first found him just south of Mono Lake in the Upper Horse Meadows area. It wasn't going to be the last time that we found him.
We originally found him in 1933. Well, we didn't find him, he dated it in 1933. But we saw him all over the place, and we thought that was the only year that he herded. That was our theory, because we just hadn't seen him anywhere else. And so we came up with the idea of he's got this beautiful writing, and we thought, well, maybe he just retired from sheep herding, he moved to San Francisco, maybe he became a priest, or maybe he became a famous calligrapher in San Francisco. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. We found him later, what was probably somewhere between 1933 and 1936, in another grove called Green Creek. That was the second time we saw him, and we recognized the writing right away. I mean, he just has such a beautiful and unique scrapped. And then
he showed up again at Monitor Pass in 1948, I believe. I'm sorry, 36. And so, you get the idea that these guys bounced around quite a bit from one outfit to another. They originally came over here on 3-year contracts, but if the food wasn't good or the wine wasn't plentiful enough, they might just decide to jump ship.
So as you might imagine, his writing was very interesting, especially to Richard as a calligrapher. So we started wondering just exactly what happened to Alex. And we did see him once again in Monitor Pass in 1948, which was kind of interesting because it was so much later than the rest of them. We thought, well, how did he get that there again? Was he just out hunting? Had he actually graduated into being a camp tender and was taking care of the rest of them? So we started doing research, and we did discover a little bit more about him. We discovered that he actually stayed in the Minden and Gardnerville area. He worked for a family by the name of Johnson for a while, and then unfortunately he passed away kind of young in 1953. And as far as we can tell, based on citizen records and on census records, he was living in one of the hotels there, one of the Basque hotels, which is where a lot of the bachelor Basques lived. And he probably passed away without a family, without going back to his home. We have no record of him going back to the Basque country. So he's kind of a typical in some ways for some of the sheepherders that never got married, they never went home, they just worked as sheepherders and they worked until they passed away. But he obviously had one friend, because his real name is Alejo. He goes by Alex in the US, but his name was Alejo. And when they made up his gravesite, they messed it up. So someone came back and corrected it. So we know he had at least one friend.
The other thing that we usually find on a tree, just below the name, is the date. Dates are really fascinating and can give us a lot of information as far as how long sheep herding occurred in a specific grove. Here we have, about 7 decades represented. Usually the first question we get, what's the earliest date we've ever seen? There's a 1904 up there. Then 1911, a couple of 1911s, 1924, I believe, 1935, what do we got? 1947, there's a 57 date there, and a 61. So some of the groves represent over 100 years of sheep herding history.
Yeah, and one of the unfortunate things is that a lot of these older trees that we're seeing here just no longer exist. Most aspen trees live about 80 to 100 years. So we're not really seeing a lot of the early 1900 dates anymore. It's very rare if we ever see it in 1800 dates. Probably the most recent one we saw was in Johns Wash, and that was in 1898, and that's on the east side of Nevada. So they just aren't very common anymore. But a lot of these guys, they don't want to carve just one date. They want to make sure you know they have been here
forever. Yeah, like our Martine, we got sick of him. Oh yeah, some of the groves, there's 15 of his carvings, pretty much the same every one of them. So show a little more creativity, but we really enjoy his calendar trees originally. And he wants to let you know that he's been a brave man in the middle of the mountains for quite a while. The other one that we have was interesting from the Monitor Pass area, Fermin. Notice that F, how he did his F there. And the Espanol, below Espanol is Nevada, which is the province in Spain. And he wants you to know that he's a Basque from Navarro. Vasco Nevado, Spanish Basque. And so that F brings us to another. Oh yeah, sorry. So from dates, another really amazing thing that we find on the trees is a lot of these guys carve hometown where they hailed from in the Basque country. So it shows a great deal of pride in where they came from. This one actually is Lhasa, which is a small village in French Basque country. And below that is Urupel-Dara, which is another town just across the border from the Spanish Basque country. Now, interestingly, we see that suffix Dara, D-A-R-R-A, which is normally just tied together with the village name. So Urupel-Dara means, I'm a resident of Urupel, or I come from Urupel. A way of representing, creating an identification with the place.
And we're back to Antonio Urrutia again.
Oh no, not again.
And this time he's carving where he's from, but he carved it down the tree. So he's from Linzuane, and it's Linzuane Dara, goes all the way down the tree. So that's.
And then also provinces are represented too. In the middle is Vizcaya, it's one of the 4 Basque provinces. We also have Nevada. Of course, we have French Basque as well in this area. So France is represented, España, and on the far end there is Santander. I don't know if anybody knows exactly where that is in Spain. It borders the Basque country right on the edge. So a number of herders came from that area, especially the gentleman that I got sick of, Martin Potashin.
And they not only brag about where they're from, they do brag about being in the United States as well. So a lot of times you see Viva America, that's pretty common to see on a tree. The picture there, the carver is Antonio Villanueva, and Villanueva actually resided in Minden Gardnerville. He's the one with the accordion, and he worked at both JT's and the Overland Hotel while he was there, and his 2 buddies are keeping him coming here. He is also known for adding a little something else to his Viva America. He usually said, Viva America y los Dolores.
So a reminder that this immigrant group came to make their fortune in America like everyone else. We also have folks who came from out of the area, Great Basin area. This one is carved Taos, New Mexico. This was in the eastern Nevada area, in the area we call John's Wash. It's an old date, 1917. So a number of herders were recruited from other sheep herding areas like New Mexico. And then as the Basques dropped out of the sheep herder ranks, who took their place?
And usually the Basque stopped coming because the economy in the Basque country got a lot better. And this is not an industry that pays well, nor is it a good living out in the middle of nowhere. So if you have a nice job at home, coming here is probably not what you want to do. So you have to look toward countries that were having similar early economical issues. And so right away you think about Mexico and Chile and Argentina. So there's a variety. And finally, the one that now comes more than anything else that you'll find the herders up in the hills is Peru. And you'll notice that they also carved where they're from. They're very proud. They kind of copied a little bit of what the earlier carvers did, but they kind of developed their own styles.
And that's what we want to talk about right now, style, which again, as a calligrapher, I'm just really fascinated with how these men, it's hard enough to draw on paper sometimes, much less on a circular surface like a tree. One of our favorite, I call artists of the Grove, the master artist, is this gentleman who doesn't look very Basque, actually, Joe Mortensen. And he represents a whole other group of sheep herders. Early on in I believe it's 1850s, the Mormons went to Scandinavian countries to recruit folks to come and settle in Mormon country. And a large number of these folks ended up in central Utah, one particular county, Sanpete County. And Joe represents that group we were really shocked to go into this grove in eastern Nevada and see all these Mormon names, basically, and Mormon community place names. But Joe really put on the style. You can see the JCM is his initials, but inside that M is the rest of his last name, Mortensen. The other carving is all vertically done. He did really, really very flourishy capital letters, and almost every tree was unique in its different style. Of course, you get somebody who really knows how to carve and does an artistic job, and you get people trying to copy that style, like Joe's nephew, Lyman Marion Christiansen. Notice the initials LMC and how very close that looks to Joe Mortensen's style. So carvers copied one another when they come into the grove and see something they really like. Hey, I want to do that too.
This one, the one on the right, this is Larzaval, and Larzaval was in that same grove with Alex Aristorza, and if you kind of look at the style, you could say Larzaval was probably trying to copy Aristorza as far as carving down the tree. Beautiful handwriting. One of the things we do see a lot of is the really nice handwriting, especially from the older Basque, and a lot of that has to do with being brought up in Catholic schools. Even if they only made it through the 3rd or 4th grade, you learned how to do long handwriting, and you learned it well, because if you didn't, there was a ruler waiting to land on your knuckles. So they had beautiful handwriting. It's one of the ways that we can identify early carvers is just by that handwriting. And then some other people developed their own styles. The Jose Inza might be hard to tell by this, but that's taking up 3/4 of the tree. It is huge. He wanted to make sure everybody saw his name.
And then I call these two the cursive cousins because they demonstrate again the artistry of using a knife or a nail and creating beauty on this ghostly white canvas. So we have one of the masters is Pierre Igoa. And the other one, Pierre herded and carved in the eastern Nevada area, just an area called Cherry Creek, north of Ely, Nevada. And then on the other side of the Great Basin, we had Julian Garate leading his cursive style, a 1942 date there. So I really get excited when I see this kind of work. It just really inspires me to do what I do even better.
And block lettering can be beautiful too. This is one of my favorites. This is Pete Donat. He's French Basque, and he also was on the east side of the Sierras, on the east side of Nevada, and he worked for the Paris Ranch, which is a fairly famous ranch over in the Ely area.
Look at those threes. All right. Well, and simplicity can be sometimes the best process. But we wanted to put you to the test here and see you got the eye on these arborglyphs. So what do you think about this name?
Isidoro, very good.
Isidoro. Okay, you passed that one. Now let's move on to the next degree of difficulty.
Isidoro was in Jarvage.
Anybody make this one out?
Shout it out.
Let's hear it.
Español, very good. Español. The top Español.
Claro. Fermin.
Back to Fermin.
Yeah,
very
we've
good.
already seen him once before on the calendar tree, so he gave you a big clue.
Speak louder and tell me what they say, because I didn't hear you.
Oh, the name on there was Fermin was the name. It was Español, and we were talking about the fact that you guys have seen Fermin already. Okay, next one. Who can read this one? The top is slightly cut off, but you should be able to read it. Joaquin. Okay, we got Joaquin.
That's half.
36.
And we got the date 1936. Anybody guess the name next to Joaquin, what his last name is? It's a little harder to see. Very fancy G is Gandara. Joaquin Gandara in 1936.
And there is a lady in there
Yeah.
dancing away. I think she's flying, but Nancy says she's dancing. Is she dancing? Well, how many votes for dancing? Oh, yeah.
And one more. Very good, I heard it right away. Bedart. Bibi Dart. Yeah, Bibi Dart. Yeah, and then it has the date of June 22. One thing I want to point out, this one is Bedart's A. This is a clue when we're looking at carvings. That type of A that slashes with the, instead of cutting straight across, goes down. That's a Basque A. So even if you didn't know Bedart was a Basque name, you'd immediately know that this is a Basque carving. Little hint.
So you can tell we've had a few Tylenol headaches trying to decipher these. And again, it's part of it's what the carver how he expresses himself, but also the other part of it is kind of what the tree does to the initial carving. Because again, the tree is stretching out as it grows and it's expanding that carving. And if you carve too closely or too deeply, it becomes really difficult to read 50 or 60 years later. So the best carvers knew how to space their letters and just scratch the surface of the tree rather than gouging into it.
So remember that the next time you go to Coventry. We always say that the stars of the show on the aspen trees are the graphics.
How about this? Pretty elaborate. It's found in the Bodie Hills, and we're working up there in 2014. And again, a lot of these carvings are based around the camps that herders stayed in. So once we can find a camp, we usually find a concentration of carvings because they'd be coming back to that camp day after day after they brought the sheep to feed and water.
And usually when we see one this elaborate, we kind of wonder, did he have any time to watch the sheep?
Oh, another unique set of carvings are found in the Monitor Pass area, denoting, of all things, boxing. Boxing is a big pastime in the Basque country, amongst Basque. And I think these boxing carvings were inspired by an historic fight that occurred in Reno in 1931. Paulino Euskadun, sorry. I don't mind being corrected by a Basque, but anybody else? Euskadun was fighting Max Bear in 1931, and if anything was going to get the sheepherders to leave their sheep, it was a fight with the Basque heavyweight champion. And sure enough, the Basques leave their sheep to come, and it probably laid down a bit of their money as well too. Euskadun ended up winning that fight, and later he fought Joe Louis, and unfortunately he lost that match. But he was still considered a hero in the Basque country until another historic event occurred.
Unfortunately, and I considered him a hero. I was always very proud to talk about and say that his carvings and the Euskadun is listed up at Monitor Pass, and people were very proud of him. But he eventually, when he returned to the Basque country, he ended up being a spokesperson for Franco. So much for heroism.
It has its limits. On the other side of the state, in eastern Nevada, come across another boxing thing going on. Joe Louis fought Max Schmeling, a German boxer, and one of the herders, his name was Johnny Goyeneche, apparently was a big boxing fan, and he apparently got the news that Joe Louis had knocked out Schmeling, and 6 days later he carved these 2 trees to depict that historic boxing match. So you see the victor with his gloves up, and then you see the vanquished lying on the canvas, Schmeling, you lost.
So we have to give our official warning about the carvings we're about to show. If you're easily offended, you might not want to look. Because the number one thing after the names and dates that these young men carved were women. This is hollow deer. And first time when we saw this in the Grove, this was over in Decatur Canyon on the east side of Nevada, and Richard kept going, hollow deer, I don't get it, hollow deer. And he said it, and I would go, I get it, because my mom would always talk about coming across these Basque young men, and they would always look her up and down and say, hollow deer. So that's what he's doing, he's saying, hollow deer, to her, so that's where that comes from.
Right, their depictions of women cover a lot of different styles and varieties, sometimes from the sacred to the profane. There's 2 styles here. Unfortunately, one of the carvings is covering up the nose of the other lady, but looks like it could be a girlfriend or a wife that was left behind in the Basque country by that sheepherder. Some things are a little more complex and ornate, but there's also something to be said for simplicity, too.
And just so you don't think that this guy messed up, that big long stretch there is what the tree did. He knew what he was drawing, don't worry. And then also sometimes, yes, they do draw women with clothes on. In this particular, in the 1930s, 1936, during the Spanish Civil War, you see on trees women dressed fully clothed and looking like that they're actually in the military. And this was an advertisement for, during that time period, for women to come to war. And these herders knew about that, so they depicted them on the trees.
This is we call her the running lady from Monitor Pass. And again, these are single young men alone for months at a time. Where does their mind drift to? Women.
One of our friends probably said it best. For any of you who either have had teenage boys or have been a teenage boy, you can recognize these young men were here during their early teens through their early 20s. They didn't have Playboy magazines. They didn't have the internet. They had to have something. So they didn't consider this pornography. They just considered this something to draw and to keep their minds occupied with what occupies teenage boys and young men.
And I can personally vouch for the teenage Playboy story. We have this lady's just kind of walking off into the distance through one of the ghostly Aspens. This is in Eastern Sierra, Sawmill Meadows area. And, okay, this is Nancy's favorite carving.
This is my favorite carving. Again, I mentioned that time period in the 1930s when the Spanish Civil War was going on. And this is a great carving. The gentleman who carved this, we'll see more of his. He's that carver we saw earlier, Joaquin Gandara. He is the antithesis of most of the other carvers. Most of the carvers who came to the United States, most of the sheepherders, most of the Basque, were uneducated. They might have gone to the 3rd grade, but their families were poor. They had to come here to try and make money for their families. They weren't artistic. They weren't educated. They didn't keep up on things. But Gandara kept up on that war, and this is his carving of that lady I was talking about, the military lady. And she would be on posters encouraging the other women to come and fight in the war. And this is his depiction, which is just amazing.
Yeah, the other thing to consider when we're talking about women and carvings is the fact that, again, these men were out alone, released from kind of the religious and cultural taboos that they would have had in the old country, and free to express themselves in any way, shape, and form, particularly their sexual fantasies. But like Nancy said, we do find women that are actually clothed. This one, very elegant and lavish, with I think it's a boa coming off, with a dress. I think all her parts are there. She's in the Conway Meadows area, just north of Mona Lake.
And also in that same grove, we call her the Queen of the Grove. We're not sure, he was definitely dreaming about something more than just any woman. He definitely had something in mind when he was carving this lady.
Right, and again, look at the simplicity of the line here. Very few cuts, but you get the point across pretty simply. Yeah, some of these women might have been taken from pin-up calendars of those eras.
And then, of course, there's
Men, sheepherder men, with a very exaggerated sense of their selves. Very interesting self-portraits. Maybe a little less exaggerated.
Simple.
They've got a good handle on life.
Man with gun.
And then we have a man with a gun, possibly. These herders, the basics were a canvas tent, a burro or a horse, a 30-30 rifle, and maybe a couple of sheepherder dogs. So they would go out occasionally and hunt, but mostly the rifle was for protection, protecting the sheep from the obvious predators, mountain lions, coyotes, and possibly bears too.
Interesting self-portrait. And then sometimes they carved what they were dreaming of, and probably what most of them were dreaming of is eventually getting out of there and buying a suit, either going back to the old country or starting a business, something that would get them away from these darn sheep.
A man looking to the future. And of course, when you have men and women, they invariably come together. So this scene is from the Jarbidge area. And then we have a really amazing carving that we found in Eastern Sierra. You're probably familiar with the running of the bulls.
That's what he's doing.
And that's what's happening. And so this herder is really expressing his homesickness and possibly loneliness because he can't be a part of the San Fermin festival because he's busy with his darn sheep. Maybe next year.
And some of them probably also dreamed of going home, back to the Basque country, to a little Vasaria, being able to sit across from their hopefully someday wife. And that's definitely what Arnaud was thinking of, Pierre Arnaud, when he carved this. Also one of my favorite carvings.
Right, the herders did relate to their environment, the number of carvings of different animals that they encountered. Like I mentioned, the predators sometimes show up on the trees, coyotes, mountain lions, but also bird life, quail, things they might have even hunted there. So there's several different quail on that picture there. That's from the Bodie Hills as well.
And then sometimes this is the Basque flag, or kind of a stylized version on a tree of the Basque flag. Again, an item that they would be very proud to show, as well as the laburos, which is a, whoops. Okay, just to explain the laburo, lao is four in Basque, buro is head, so it's the four heads. There's lots of definitions as to what the laburo stands for. It's a very, very ancient symbol. The one I like best, we actually saw in a museum in the Basque country in Sugarramurdi, and the museum was dedicated to incidences where people were misunderstood and abused. And so they were talking about the importance of the laburo to the Basque, to go through that, and it refers to it as the four elements all moving around together as one. And I like that explanation.
And then we have our commentaries on the trees. Sometimes very emotional and very frustrating statements, such as this one. Everybody can read that one? 6/24/2000, our new Polaris, only 8.8 miles and already broken. I hope this has not happened to you. Those of you who have side-by-sides.
And sometimes they have a whole lot to say, and we haven't a clue what it is. This is a very long tirade that somebody wrote, and it's all in Basque, and we don't understand a word.
Probably a good thing.
And then sometimes they may be commentaries. I always wonder if this one might have been somebody who was coming back from a trip to the city and had undergone maybe some prejudice, because there was a lot of prejudice that went on for the Basque and still are for a lot of the Peruvians and the Argentinians and stuff today. So I think he was just expressing frustration.
He also might have been pissed off at his sheep boss, too, who didn't provide him anything more than salt pork. This is one of the most powerful carvings we've ever come across. And so I'm going to read it to you in Spanish and then translate it. Let's see. Fascismo y comunismo son los dos extremos del salvajismo. Viva la República Liberal Agraria de Gandara, July 27, 1938. What was happening in Spain during the 30s, the late 30s? Spanish Civil War. So I'm going to translate it. So fascism and communism are two extremes of the same savagery. Long live the Republic, the liberal agrarian republic, J. Gandara, who we saw earlier on the trees. He wrote or carved 3 of these, what we call tirades, about what was going on in his home country during that time. And we believe that he might have come over from the Basque country, sent by his parents to avoid being caught up in the conflict that really destroyed the whole country, particularly the Basque country.
And then we talk about the stories that these carvings tell us, and sometimes we are able to hear from the trees and have them tell us certain things. This family, the Coscarate brothers, came from the Basque country in the 1970s. There were 3 brothers, and they kind of landed up in the Ely area and herded sheep up there. And then they all 3 went into different types of industries. They all moved on. The one brother actually still works. He moved to Bakersfield, and he went to work for wool growers in Bakersfield, and he still works there. We actually called to find out. The second brother opened a store for a period of time in Battle Mountain, but then he took what he learned at the store, which was how to make really good chorizos. And he opened a place, the Chalet Basque, in Carson City. So if you're ever looking for really good chorizos, excellent. He also does really good lamb stew. And then the third brother, he actually kind of stayed off and on in the Ely area. He went home to visit a lot more, and then he settled near his brother. I guess he likes the chorizos too.
Right, so as the trees, as the sheep industry declined considerably in the 70s for a variety of reasons, restrictions, sheep imports, recreation started to develop, and so we don't see as much of this industry that occurred back in the late 19th and early the 20th centuries. The arborglyphs give us a window into the stories, and the industry is, basically there's a few open range outfits still running sheep, but not very many. And that just kind of corresponds to the fact that the trees are dying and we're losing carvings as well.
Do our best to try and record. We have had volunteers come out and help us. A lot of what you see is thanks to the efforts of many people, not just us, coming out and doing and offering their volunteer time to help us do recordings and find some of this information. The biggest problem we're having is that the trees themselves, for various reasons, are dying off. Aspens just live 80 to 100 years, and most of these carvings are getting to be about that age or even a little older. And we also have a problem in the sense that a lot of the aspen groves are being, we call encroached. They're being, because the sheep aren't in there anymore, because we don't have the funding to go through, and we don't allow fires through these areas, the pine trees are moving in and they overtop the aspen trees and shade them out, and the trees die even quicker. So that's another consideration that we have to deal with, is finding dead and dying trees because of that, for that reason. And then, of course, as you all know, the other thing that's happening right now with global warming is that we're having more and more fires.
Yeah, one lightning strike can ignite a fire that can take out a whole grove and all those stories with it. And in terms of agencies doing prescribed burns, some of the work we've done to identify the cultural resources of arborglyphs have been very helpful in doing prescribed burning, so they know exactly where not to burn, because they give us, there are culturally significant trees in the area. So it's great to finally see that this information, the arborglyphs, are taken seriously enough by the public land agencies.
But probably the biggest is just the fact that they're getting old. It doesn't take much for the bark to start peeling off, and you no longer see the carvings themselves, and they're practically impossible to preserve. We've talked to and discussed and worked out with various agencies and archaeologists and museum studies of how to preserve them, and they're just nearly impossible to preserve because they have to be in a completely airtight conditions. If you can think of a tree trying to come up with something that's totally airtight, they've come up with lots of different ideas, but at this point, the only one that may be of preservation is something that the University of Nevada has come up with, which is a virtual, kind of like a virtual exhibit here where you can walk in and see the cave. They're trying to film and photograph arborglyphs and create an image of a grove so you could walk in and actually walk around the tree, the whole tree, and be able to see the entire image. So that is a project currently going on with the University of Nevada. And so we hope that that turns out to be successful. They're working also with Boise State and California State Bakersfield. And hopefully with those two, we'll be able to do some preservation in the future.
That allows us to get this education out there to large groups like yourselves and get folks interested and still see those trees and the carvings, even though they're no longer in a physical environment. So we thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the ghostly white aspens this evening, and we'll be happy to answer questions.